Hi everyone, it's John Mitchell. In this video, we're going to look at awards and agreements. So when a new employee begins employment at a particular business, they will sign an employment contract. That employment contract will outline things like how much they are paid, how many weeks holidays they get per year, how many hours per week they're supposed to work, how much parental leave they get when they have a baby, and all other employment conditions will be outlined in that contract. What this video is about today is how are these things determined? Why is it that different businesses have different wages and different conditions, and how are those things determined? So that's what we're looking at today. So the types of agreements in place to determine wages and conditions for employees within Australia include the National Employment Standards, awards, collective agreements, and individual employment contracts. And we're going to go through each one of those individually. The system for determining wages and conditions is set out by the Fair Work Act. Now, the Fair Work Act stipulates employee protections known as the National Employment Standards, and no employment contract can have conditions that are below the National Employment Standards. All contracts must have at least the minimum National Employment Standards or go above that. Now, there are 10 National Employment Standards that are stipulated. However, here's just a couple, just to give you an example of a couple. So maximum weekly hours is 38 hours per week. Up to 12 months unpaid parental leave, 4 weeks paid annual leave. So there's some of the minimums that are put in for the National Employment Standards. The next type of employment contract is known as awards. Awards set out the minimum wages and conditions for those in a particular industry. So there's many different industries within Australia, and an award will set the minimum wages and conditions for those in a particular industry. Awards are reviewed by the Fair Work Commission to ensure they're relevant for the current economic climate and the cost of living and those types of things. Now, employees cannot be paid or receive conditions below those stipulated in the award. So whatever industry a particular employee is working in, if there is an industry award for that particular industry, they cannot receive wages or conditions below those stipulated in that industry award. Now, for those that are on the next type of agreement, which we'll get to in a second, which is called a collective agreement, the award acts as a safety net because no employee can receive wages and conditions below those that are stipulated in the award. Now, the next form of agreement is known as a collective agreement, or you may hear it as an enterprise agreement. This is a workplace agreement between an employer and a group of employees. So we began with the National Employment Standards, which covered all employees, set the minimum for all employees. Then we went to an industry award, which set the minimum wages and conditions for all those in a particular industry. So it was more specific. We've gone more specific again now with a collective agreement because it covers a group of employees at or with a particular employer. Now, collective agreements are reached via the process known as enterprise bargaining. And enterprise bargaining is the negotiation between the employer and the employees with the goal of making an enterprise agreement. Now, I've got in brackets there all their representatives because in an earlier video we spoke about how employer associations or unions can represent the employer or the employees in the negotiation of these particular wages. Now, once a collective agreement has been agreed upon, so the employees are happy with it, they're happy with their pay and the conditions, it is then sent to the Fair Work Commission for approval. Now, they'll check over it and make sure there's been bargaining in good faith, that the employees have actually voted yes for the new agreement. But what they'll do is they'll compare it against the industry award to make sure that it does not undercut the award. A collective agreement cannot undercut the award because, as we said in the previous slide, that no employee can be paid or receive conditions underneath or below that industry award. So that's what the Fair Work Commission does, and they check that it's either at the award or above it, and most collective agreements are above the industry award. Now, every collective agreement must have a flexibility clause in it. This means that individual employees may seek to have alternative arrangements for their conditions to help suit their own personal needs. The flexibility or an individual flexibility agreement is based off the collective agreement. Now, here, just to give you an example, David works at a printing business and his normal hours of work are from 9 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. However, on Tuesdays, he coaches his daughter's soccer team, and training begins at 4:30. So David actually wants to leave work at 4 o'clock, an hour and a half earlier from work. And in order to do so, he wants to begin work at 7:30 rather than at 9 o'clock. He wants to begin at 7:30 to make up that hour and a half. However, the problem for the business is that they must pay penalty rates for all employees that begin before 8:30. So if he starts at 7:30 until 8:30, he'll be paid penalty rates for that for that hour. So an individual flexibility agreement, the two parties, David and the business, can come to an agreement where the business and David agree that he begins at 7:30 on Tuesdays, but he receives the normal pay rate. And that's just a simple example of an individual flexibility agreement that is based off the collective agreement. The next form of agreement is an individual employment contract. Now, an individual employee is able to sign a legal contract with their employer regarding wages and conditions. The employment contract must still adhere to the National Employment Standards and the award, so they can't receive conditions below those. This is often for highly paid employees, and any disputes that cannot be resolved will be settled through the courts rather than through the Fair Work Commission. So it's a common law contract, often for highly paid employees where they're receiving large sums of money, and any disputes that can't be resolved within the workplace will be settled through the courts. So just to recap, the way in which wages and conditions are determined are the National Employment Standards, which set out the minimums for all employees. Then there's an industry award, which sets out the minimums for those in a particular industry. A collective agreement is a workplace agreement or an employer agreement. And then underneath that, you can have an individual flexibility agreement, because all collective agreements need to have a flexibility clause in them. And finally, an individual contract, which is a common law contract between an individual employee and their employer. So for questions, activities, and to find out more about our Unit 4 and exam preparation lectures, then come on over to teachingbubble.com.